just an idea. I think your film is 1 minute. That's a 2-minute film. The sound is edited on it, but I'm just not going to play it now. So it's discussing the MR. What you'll also see there is that I've used. So that one's made completely from clip grabs or stills. One of the things I do when I'm working on something is I put together a file as I'm going along. I'll grab a few videos under clip grab, and then I'll edit pieces out of them, and I'll also take images. So I wanted to do this just so you can see how you can combine images, film footage, and also text. And I really suggest, as you're writing your essay, make sure you do a search. I don't know what necessarily your essay is going to be on, but do a search on areas that your essay's on, pull some images, have them there in a file, and then when you want to make the film, you can drop them in. So that you're going along as a process. So probably making that, because I made it yesterday, it probably took about 3 hours. Maybe 2 hours because I was also doing something else, but I did clip grabs, then I went to the gym, then I did something else, and then I wrote the lecture, then I did some more clip grabs. And then about 11 o'clock last night, I had the clip grabs. I wanted to use the edits all in the film section, and then I just tidied them up and uploaded to Vimeo. So I would say, all in all, if you're not used to doing it, give yourself about 4 hours. And also do a couple of run-throughs where you can publish it onto YouTube or Vimeo, but you can just publish it onto your laptop, desktop, and see what it looks like before you hand it in. Are there any questions on that or no? Any comments, questions? You're all good? Okay. And so you can see, and then the text I put on there obviously is about internet addiction. And this one has very little text on it. So Google Images is a good place to go to get images, obviously. And Clip Grab is a good place to go if you want to grab a certain portion. So you grab the whole video or film, and then you edit what you want out of it. You'll cut what you want out of it. Don't use the whole thing because then that's like plagiarism. Yeah?
What was the site?
Yes, that would be good if you cited it either in your bibliography at the back of your paper or at the back of the film. But I would put it at the back of the paper, that's fine. But yes, that would be great. Okay. Hey, Greg. So, those glasses are amazing, actually. So one of the things I want to do on the internet addiction, it's an interesting piece. It's a contemporary piece that came out last year in an online professional psychiatry journal, which you probably know from the bullet points, called Frontiers in Psychiatry. It's a research article, so I thought you should have a look at what a research article, what it looks like. They're much shorter. It's called Internet Addiction, Hikikomori. Which is a Japanese term for withdrawal. So it's Internet Addiction, Hikikomori syndrome, and what they call the primordial, I'm just going to say this right, I better spell it right too. The prodromal, they call it prodromal phase of psychosis. Prodromal means that it's when you've got some of the symptoms, but it's just in the beginning. So what they're trying to figure out is they have a case study, and it's interesting because the case study kind of is, so you've read 3 different sort of types of case studies. You've seen the Freud's case studies in hysteria, the reference to that. You've looked at Fanon's case studies, and this is a case study on internet addiction. I'm going to make reference to another study, a couple of other studies as well. So what you see then is they're trying to figure out whether it's internet addiction, whether the young man has a version, and if he does have, which is what they conclude, a version of Hikikomori. It's the first one written about in Canada. It's written by both, I think it's 3 or 4 Canadians who are psychiatrists and medical professionals, and 1 Australian. So I want you to get a sense of how the medical profession, particularly psychiatric profession, addresses, which is one of the dominant illnesses of adolescents and early adults. And you'll probably notice that they're seeing adolescents is actually quite late in life. You know, they're considering this 21-year-old as adolescent, which is kind of odd, but the term is, as you probably know for anybody that's taken a course on adolescence, the term is a very subjective term. It's based in the society in which you live, and in North America, it's broadened. So the age has gone up in adolescence. What they're looking at is internet addiction in relation to Hikikomori, which is a Japanese word that describes young adults who live in isolation from the world. That is, locked up in their bedroom for days, months, years. They refuse to communicate with their family. They only come out in order to get food, do the most basic of body needs. And as I said, this is the first published report from Canada of a case of what they determined was Hikikomori, but it manifests as a case of internet addiction. Excuse me. I'm going to supplement this with a popular culture publication and interview of a young man. So this is in Montreal. The case study for this case study is Montreal-based. I'm going to supplement it with an interview of a young man in Vancouver who was an internet addict. And it's a public interview that's published in this neighborhood newspaper called the West Ender. Now the author, so this is considered a research article. And when you cite a research article, or when you cite, oh no, I must have hit it. When you cite, how long has that been off?
Like a minute.
Okay, tell me next time, because I'm having really bad, there's something stuck in my computer. Hook up and I can't seem to get it. It's inside the computer and I can't seem to get it out. So let me try once more. And then if we get it working. So what's interesting about the 2 articles is that they actually define what's considered internet addiction. Okay, and they also take a look at how many hours a day that can constitute this. And I really hope this works. I'll be heading over to tell. See, I can see it. Maybe, does anybody have any oppressed air thing? Probably not, eh? Yeah, I know, me either. That's what I should have used. I tried everything. So it probably could, I could probably blow it out really easily. I'm guessing it's a piece of food. Okay, maybe that's going to work. It also means I can't plug the computer in to charge it. There we are. Okay. We're going to try not to touch that. So we're looking at, so I was going to say if it's multiple authors, as you probably know, it is, so it's Stip et al. So it's the first, and that's the lead author on that. So the authors of the research article note that internet addiction disorder has a lot in common with the Japanese disorder of Hikikomori. It also has quite a bit in common with schizophrenia, and not in the positive sense described by Deleuze-Guattari. And it also has quite a bit in common with what they're calling prodromal psychosis, the early stages of psychosis. So remember that Sagan talks about the paranoid position that can lead towards psychosis. And of course, Deleuze and Guattari talk about schizophrenia. And Freud himself talks about, so if you're looking at sort of mental or disorders, what we've looked at, of course, is neurosis, psychosis that Freud makes reference to, which is sort of the extreme of neurosis, and which Sagan looks at in the paranoid position. Then we've looked at colonial mental disorders. We've looked at schizophrenia, both as a positive and as a negative manifestation. H there. And so now we're looking at a particular type of addiction which has symptoms similar to Hikikomori and has manifest symptoms that can be taken for psychosis and schizophrenia. So these are early symptoms of psychosis. Fear of people, feeling that people are out to get you, which your family probably is if you're hiding in your room. So I want to give you some stats on Canadian internet usage. And this comes from the ComScore report. So if you Google ComScore, I believe these are for 2015. There's a ComScore report on Canadian internet stats. As you probably know, Canada is has one of the highest uses of the internet globally, as does the US, partly because of standard of living. Canadians 25 to 34, so just a bit older than your group. Okay. So 25 to 34 are the heaviest internet users in this particular study. So what they average, according to these 2015 statistics, is 110 hours a month, or 3.5 hours a day. This is 2015. I think we could probably say average of 4 hours a day. We'll make it 20 hours a month as opposed to 110. Because that was in 2015, and there's more you can do online now than there was in 2015. And that's across various devices and various usages. So when they say various devices, they mean computer, mobile phone. When they say various usages, they mean watching videos, playing games, texting, checking email, doing social media, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. So you say, okay, well, 4 hours a day if you include watching a movie or something is not that much, and you'd be right. And of course, some people are online, especially in terms of addiction. Addiction is considered 6 hours or more per day. One of the features. Some people are online 12 hours or more. We can talk about that as well. So China, of course, recognized internet addiction as a clinical disorder as early as 2008. And it's considered the #1 health threat for youth. It also has a gendered manifestation. So more males suffer from internet addiction than females. China's a really weird case because 14% of Chinese youth are considered addicted to the internet. So then they came up with these, I don't know if you've heard about them, but the detox centers. The internet detox centers, they're hard to find now because they're pretty brutal. So there's hard to really have current numbers, The numbers in 2013 were 250 internet detox centers. And one of the problems with the detox centers is in order to cure, or so-called cure internet addiction, they administer shock therapy, shock aversion therapy. So the New York Times in January this year, 2017, did a study, and the Chinese government has drafted a law that's going to crack down on these internet detox centers, crack down on their worst excesses, including electroshock and physical punishments. The legislation is also going to limit how much time per day minors, that's under, I wonder what age a minor is in China, it's either 21 or 18, we'll say 18. Legislation that will also limit how much time each day that minors could play online games at home or in internet bars, which means, yes?
I googled it. Are you looking for age majority or age consent?
They're going with minors, so I guess it would have to be, what's the difference in the ages,
Age
Stephen?
majority comes out to 18, age of consent is 14.
It's got to be age majority, 18. Yeah, age of consent, that's the same as Canada then. You Google for China, right?
Changed ours from 14 to 16.
Unless the other person is also,
Yeah, the Romeo and Juliet.
Age
Yeah.
proximity,
yeah. Okay, so did you Google Canada or China?
China.
Okay, excellent. So it's the same. So basically, their age of consent is lower right now than the Canadian age of consent, unless, of course, both people are below 16 and between 14 and 16. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So then legislation is going to limit how much time each day that minors, that's 18-year-olds, could play online games at home or in internet bars. And the reason they're going to do that is because the games are going to have to make people use their own names, register in their real names. So the providers of the games are obliged to take measures to monitor and restrict use, requiring players to register their real names. And minors, which is 18 and under, the new law doesn't specify how many hours, but minors 18 and under are prohibited from playing online games anywhere between midnight and 8 a.m. So I'm sure there's a way around that, but there's an attempt for people to at least have 8 hours offline. Partly, I mean, you may be familiar with the 2012 case of a 23-year-old gamer that was not in, this is in Taiwan, but the gamer was dead in an internet cafe in Taiwan for 9 hours before he was noticed. And his name was Chen Rongyu, 23, is thought to have suffered a heart attack after playing League of Legends for 23 hours. So I don't know if you've played League of Legends. There's a clip from League of Legends on there. So basically no one noticed because they were so busy playing, but also because the report says that he was sitting the same position that you would be sitting in if you were playing in front of the screen with his hands on the keyboard, and it was at an internet cafe. So there's more and more cases. There's usually, I would say, roughly 3 to 5 a year where people are dying in internet cafes. Sometimes, though, when I was researching this, sometimes it's from being electrocuted from plugging in devices. So it's not necessarily from gameplay, which means they've got really bad, there must be, in the cases where that happens, a really faulty, so they're getting a shock. That's happened, when I was looking at it, it happened in 2 cases. So in a sense then, there's an attempt to try and prohibit, I don't know, does anybody here play games for 23 hours? I mean, you probably don't want to admit it because then you're going to go, oh yeah, I'm addicted. But I mean, it's also like binge watching series. Like it's this incredible focus. It's for 23 hours, where you don't sleep, and which usually ends up, people have died of also dehydration, but cardiac arrest on young people is one of the major outcomes. So it's a major concern. I mean, internet addiction is a major concern for health professions, both in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. And it's not included yet in the DSM manual, or the DS manual, The last one being the fifth one, which came out in 2013, is probably a move to include it in the next one. So the DSM manuals, for people that just have forgot what it stands for, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. It's a standard used by mental health professions in the US and in Canada after 2013 in Canada. Now psychiatrists are arguing that internet addiction should be included under addiction in the manual. Interestingly, gaming, but not internet gaming, but gaming is included. And then in gaming, what they probably have in mind is gambling in terms of gaming. So there are those that argue that it should be included in addiction. And they note that the disorder has 4 addictive characteristics, which is noted in the article. The article has more than 4, but some of those can be included in these, and I'll go over both. And they're the ones that are in abbreviated form that come up on the screen. Excessive use is the first one. And excessive use that in a sense is accompanied by an impaired sense of the passage of time. So, if you're online and you're on global time and you're playing in a game, you really don't know what time it is. And what goes with this is neglecting basic needs such as hunger and sleep. So that's one of the characteristics of addiction. The second is withdrawal from going online. So if you don't go online, you suffer withdrawal symptoms. Manifest the way withdrawals manifest if you've ever been addicted to anything. Anger, depression, tension, and there's also just pain. And the third one, tolerance. That is, the person is building up tolerance to longer and longer periods of use, combined with the need to upgrade their system all the time so they can play faster. And the fourth, so you've got excessive use, you don't know what time it is, you neglect hunger and sleep and going to work, suffering withdrawal symptoms if you're not online, developing tolerance so that you can play longer and longer. And the fourth one are the negative repercussions. And these are, fighting with your family. So negative repercussions in terms of online behavior. Fighting with your family, arguments, fatigue, problem at school, refusal to go to school, not wanting to get a job because it's bullshit. I added that, but I know this from a friend of mine's grandson, he's a really great guy. And you kind of have to agree with the guy on a lot of things he's saying, which is, I'm also going to take something out of a PhD that I was supervising on digital. And because, I don't know. I guess if you don't know what time it is and you can't function offline, and if you're suffering withdrawal symptoms, if you're not online, and if you've got, I don't know about the tolerance is probably a good thing, and if you've got these negative repercussions from what Freud would call, what Freud would call, or what Lacan would call, let's go to Lacan for this. So if you're suffering negative repercussions from the symbolic, which is the social, the rule of law, and you're also suffering negative repercussions in the family because you're arguing, if you're suffering fatigue, if you're not going to school or work, which goes into the symbolic, if you're lying, if you've got social isolation and you've got sort of lack of ambition, well, okay, probably you are addicted, and probably it's a problem. Now, I'm thinking of this really cool guy. I think he's 16 now, so he doesn't have to go to school. He refuses to go to school on grounds that people don't. Well, it's not as interesting. If you're used to being online, you can find information at your fingertips, and we'll talk about that too. Then being in school is not necessarily as interesting. And he had bad school experiences where people, he got into. He's a pacifist, so he got beat up and didn't fight back, and stuff like that. But what's interesting is he was up in his room playing games all the time. So what his grandma did, because he lives with his grandma, was a pretty smart woman and a therapist, right? So what his grandma did was she was like, okay, I'm going to play games all the time. That's okay, I want to see you. So she canceled for a couple of days internet subscription, so that he didn't have, like, she had him cut off. Then she moved all his stuff downstairs where the computer and everything is, so he plays all the time, but he has to play in the living room. That way he has to interact with people. So he's set up down there, and he's really a nice guy, actually. And so I thought what she did was very interesting. She's like, I want to see you. I don't want you in your room all the time. And, I also want to know what you're doing, because some of the games people behave really badly, and like one of them, he was playing, one of the other people playing was like, it seemed making his brother engage in like abusive acts. So, she stepped in and said, you have to stop doing that, that's abusive, so that kind of stuff. So, she wasn't monitoring what he's doing, but she just like noticed this, right? So she has him there, and one of the things I noticed when I was over for like Christmas, I think, it was like Christmas dinner or something, he didn't want to stop playing games for Christmas dinner. And that's okay, I don't blame him in a sense, because it's like older people, like, it's not very interesting. But he got his dinner, which was good, and took it and continued playing and said, I'm in the middle of a game, I'm just going to get my dinner, which is fine. So, in that sense, I think she handled it in a very interesting way, in that he's in a way has to be social, he's not isolated in his room, and he's eating. And she also set up some rules about like certain hours you couldn't be on. And now he's 16, so that was before he was 16. What's not happening is he's not going to school and he's not getting a job. Okay. And I don't really have anything on that, actually. So do you guys know? Do you have examples that are similar to that of people, or no? Like, is that fairly common?
It is common. Beyond.
Yeah. The other thing is, what's also common is he convinced his grandmother that he was developing, he's a genius, and he's developing, who knows, it could be, sure, why not. He's working on developing a new game. So there's all these, and if you've seen the movie on people developing games, which is an amazing documentary, yeah, could be, could not be. I have a sneaking suspicion, like anywhere, everyone who considers themselves a genius may not be, but they could be. So, it's hard to tell. And hopefully, the hope is that he'll get interested in something around university and computers. But for those of you, if anybody's here studying like information technology, it's not necessarily as interesting as it could potentially be at this point. So it's hard. Now, there's a Canadian addiction specialist called Gaber. He has an interesting book. His last name is Mete. He's Vancouver-based. He's an addiction specialist. And early on, he wrote this book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addictions. Now he's turned to internet addiction, and he has 3 reasons why it's so widespread. And these reasons, in a sense, fall into what Lacan would call the symbolic realm. One is, it's really available in North America, Europe, Asia. It's widely and generally available. And he makes the argument that and I was thinking, but it is. He makes the argument that if crack was that readily available, everybody would be doing that. And I was like, well, clearly it is in my neighborhood, which is like downtown Kensington, around Kensington Market, right? And everybody's not doing it, but okay. The second one is that people are lonely and they have empty lives, which is one of the reasons internet addiction has become so widespread. What he suggests is that it can fill a void or people feel a void inside themselves, which is what Lacan would call the lack. So in a sense, you can link sort of addiction of any kind of internet addiction with what Lacan would call the lack. It's this void inside, there's a desire to fill it, it can never be completely filled. That's why Mete calls his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Because of course, hungry ghosts can never fully be fed, right? So the second reason there is that people feel this void inside themselves, and they try to fill it from the outside, from the symbolic. And what he suggests is you go to your cell phone, you go on YouTube, you distract yourself from the discomfort of being with yourself. So people very rarely, I mean, I'm sure you notice this if you're in some place where people are not as connected, but if you see people sitting by themselves in Toronto, for example, myself included, if they're sitting by themselves in a restaurant or somewhere waiting for an event to start, and they're by themselves, they'll usually be online. Now they could be reading a book on their device, whatever, but there's very rarely, then if you go somewhere like, I don't know, I was going to say India's not a good example because everybody's online in India all the time too, right? But if you go somewhere where it's a smaller place, you'll see people apparently, or poor, apparently just, sitting and not doing that much. Or maybe reading a book. So in a sense, what they're doing is they're actually with themselves. And what Mete is arguing is that we have an inability to be with ourselves. And the third one, that he says one of the reasons that internet addiction is so widespread is that, we're living in a fast society. We have a lot of attachments, and our family attachments are sort of eroded. There's no substitute taking place. And what the internet does is provide connections, because his fundamental assumption is human beings want to be connected. Okay, it's still there, and I know to blow probably air into it. Should work. Now to go back to the research article, what they've noted since the 70s in Japan is that there's been this increase in social withdrawal. The term Hikikomori. Social withdrawal, the verb hiki means to move backwards and komori means to come into. And this disorder mainly affects, as they said before, adolescents and young adults. The symptoms are similar to internet addiction. They're cut off from the world, they live in their parents' home, locked in their bedrooms, they refuse to communicate, and they use the internet a lot. Sometimes more than 12 hours a day. So then the question is whether hikikomori should be diagnosed if there's also a symptom of internet addiction. The question is, how can you tell which it is? I guess the answer that they came up with and what they're going to end with is if you take away connection, internet connection, take away computers, and see if the symptoms are still the same. Now they introduced this term called comorbidity. Which is a weird term. But what it means is that you've got two disorders present. You've got the simultaneous presence of two chronic conditions. And they play off against one another. So you can see how hikikomori and internet addiction can play off against one another. Now the case that Stip et al. Look at is a 21-year-old man who lives in Montreal. And he's considered adolescent. The category of adolescence, youth and adolescence, is pretty wide. So he's got no previous medical issues. He had one issue where he would compulsively rock himself to sleep, but that was treated, and he no longer did that. He's studying engineering at a university. He plays sports, and he's considered really bright. It seems that traumatic event that started his withdrawal was he lost an academic competition. It's kind of sad, because believe me, you're going to win some academic competitions, and you're going to lose some academic competitions. And he began to spend more and more time alone in his room. And so the symptoms, or the manifest symptoms, if you want to go to manifest symptoms, what was going on is that he wouldn't join the family for dinner. He'd grab something and eat it while he was in his room. He'd grab something and return to the computer. And for the first year, he lived at home. He lived in his room. He ate meals that were prepared for him, probably by his mom or dad. And he ate these alone in his bedroom. So the next year, and his family were, bothering him, if you talk to him, I guess. The next year he moved out to his own apartment, which was paid for by his family. Now you're thinking probably, internet addiction, because I was just thinking, internet addiction means, I think, I don't know, but to be able to fully pursue internet addiction, there has to be a certain level of material wealth. You know, you have to, like, if your family is really impoverished, you're not going to be able to, like, be in your room stuck on the internet, because you're going to have to be out working to try and bring in money so that they can live. So it's no surprise that the three areas where internet addiction is most pronounced are Asia, North America, and Europe. That's not to say they aren't in other locations, but these are where most of the studies come from. And again, it's like what Fanon talks about in terms of, you know, the Oedipal complex. It would be really interesting to see how internet addiction and the Oedipal complex could relate to each other. But it's what Fanon talks about, and also Deleuze and Guattari, in terms of the Oedipal complex, not being present in situations of dire poverty or extreme situations. Internet addiction also is not so prevalent if you're living in poverty, because you have to have A, access, and B, you have to be allowed to have the time to actually spend 12 hours a day or 6 hours a day online. So I think you could do a class analysis of that as well. You know, so just in this case, the fact that the 21-year-old's family is paying for his apartment indicates that they have excess money that they can do this. And the fact that they're bringing him food to his room also indicates that they have money, but he doesn't need to work. So when he had his own apartment, his time was spent online, usually playing video games. He said he was still going to university classes, but they weren't sure. His friends and family really worried about him, okay? Because he had friends. They worried because he was spending 12 hours a day online. So his family took away his computer for several weeks. Now here's something interesting. The absence of the computer had no effect on his withdrawal and isolation. So from that you can see that he had a combination of these two conditions, Hikikomori and internet addiction. You have what's called a comorbidity. Right, does that spell right? Yes, it is. Then he fails again at university. And he requests to live with a family member. So he lives with a family member, they don't say which one. And his antisocial behavior improves by the second year, or it improves. But by the second year with the family member, he's spending 15 hours online. And he stopped attending university classes, and when people tried to help him, and obviously probably also criticize him, he becomes aggressive and irritable. Once he has no finances, so they cut his finances basically, the now probably 23, 24-year-old man becomes more open to change, and he agrees to go to a psychiatrist. So they do a mental examination on him. They use MRI, they do a number of other examinations, and they find out that he's completely normal. He's got minor obsessive compulsive traits. He has maybe emotional numbing. They look at that. He suffers from social withdrawal and some phobia and anxiety. But he didn't have any evidence of delirium, which is a sign of schizophrenia. He had no evidence of depression, and he had no suicidal tendencies. His cognition was normal. His neurological examination and MRI were also normal. And when asked, he had this interesting insight into the reasons for his social withdrawal. He says it was a way of being free. And he also indicated an intergenerational misunderstanding. And the intergenerational misunderstanding, in a sense, is not so far off. Because you're dealing with a generation who really doesn't get the seductive internet connection that people can make so that it becomes more real than material reality. But you can do more things online than you can do in material reality. And you can be the person you want to be online, whereas you can't in material reality. I mean, and it's been studied a lot. So one of the grad students, he's a doctor now, PhD, Adnan Silimovic, in his 2015 dissertation, he called it Stillborn, the libidinal economy of gadgetized mediation in the era of socialization for consumption, but it's just known as Stillborn. He takes a look at a decade of research on the question of youth and addiction. And some of it comes down simply to intergenerational misunderstanding. And so if you take a look, and he's documented, the research runs from 1986 to 2014. And he says that according to various discourses, this is a quote from his dissertation, adolescents become addicted because they're kind of narcissists, they're maladjusted narcissists, in the sense that they don't engage, they really don't want to engage in social productivity. They have a history of lacking experience in social relations, which means that they are alienated, and this makes them prone to further alienation. They've been found to be emotionally immature. There's an overt need for audio-visual stimulation. Now, Adnan's not agreeing with this, he's just putting it out there, but I thought it's worth knowing what the studies come up with. They are depressives, substance users. It's found that a lot also have ADHD, and that their sociality itself is formed in gaming space. That they come to depend on the medium of gaming space for their sociality. They play with gender and sexuality, but they tend to reproduce. So if you look at the games, or if you, I did it again. If you look at the games, or if you play games, I must have bumped into it. If you look at games, or if you play games, you'll see that the gender reproduction on many of them is quite similar to the gender reproduction in society. And that's what they were finding. I'll try once more, and then I'm just going to leave it. Yeah, I can see it. I'll see if I can get it out at break time. I was trying yesterday as well. Okay, I'm just going to leave it. To go back to where I was, they play with gender and sexuality, but they tend to, in most games, reproduce existing gender regimes. They use internet games to fight off boredom. And the feelings that they get, the affect that they get playing games, of course, is stronger than what they get in the material world, so they want to stay connected for that. The immersion and attachment satisfies a craving for social recognition. Of course, adolescents are also drawn to gaming like gambling. And indeed, some make lots of money gambling. So, what's happening, the studies have found, is that adolescents are exhibiting physical symptoms of addiction, and that's precisely what the research article is looking at. Now, what they find also, the study they've looked at, is that they're predominantly located in American, European, and Asian middle class. They're located in a class that can afford, as I was saying before, a consumptive lifestyle. And then, I don't know, do people, because one of the games he looks at is Minecraft. I don't know, has anybody played Minecraft here? Yes? Yes, okay. So one of the things the researchers found is why, because they take a look at Minecraft to see why people find solace in games, right? And this one has been, Minecraft is really, there's a lot, or there isn't a lot, sorry, of academic research on it, but it's part of everyday economics of middle-class households. And what it does is it captures free-flowing attention, it disperses an affect of satisfying, as it enables control over building blocks paralleled by any sort of attempt in reality. So what Adnan suggests is he would tie the playing with building blocks to the problem of material accumulation and clutter in consumer society, but in Minecraft, a player can see all his creations in one place. There's no dust, there's no discoloration, there's a completion, there's no sign of deterioration because of repetitive use. There's no experience of the other, we don't have to be human. So it's a connection that's made to sort of a broader lack, but for the duration of doing it, the lack is kind of closed up, if you want to put it in Lacan's terms. Now, for people that just came in, I'm having computer connection problems. I've got, I think, crumbs in where you put the hookup in. Of course, not just adolescents play games. One of the things that Adnan looks at is somebody who works on Wall Street. So somebody who works on Wall Street is online all day trading, Wall Street day trader. He comes home wired from what's called cognitive labor. That's labor, cognitive labor being thinking labor. And what's also kind of known as commodified attention, because really what he's doing is investing. And what he does is he does gaming. So instead of seeing labor or his mental activity as laboring, now it's leisure. And so he will continue playing online 5 or 6 hours. What Adnan does is also take a look then and juxtapose the case of what he calls the unemployed reserve army of middle-class laborers. The reserve army, of course, being those who are not employed but are standing by to be employed, and a number of places, as I'm sure you know, take a look at online skills in terms of training for the job. So for the reserve army of middle-class laborers, the unemployed, they really are online in terms of thought to their future job aspirations. But they hope that these lie within a gamified ethic. What happens is, to go back to Lacan's concept of lack, that being online, as I'm sure you know, in a sense, meets this desire for immediacy. That it's much more immediate. It doesn't happen so much in material reality. Now, if you go to, we talked about the reserve army, we talked about the Wall Street trader. It's in March 2015. It's an interesting Vancouver community newspaper article. So we had Montreal, so I thought Vancouver would be a good also study, because the case study in the research article is Montreal. So this is Vancouver. It's a community newspaper article from the West Ender. So if you've been in Vancouver, you've probably seen the West Ender. It's March 2015, so it's about 2 years old. And it's an interview with a person who's called Andrew McDonald. And the interview is about his extreme gaming addiction. We're fine for time. I'm sorry about this. I'll try and get it cleaned out during break. And what he said was, in a 72-hour period, which is a 3-day period, he spent about 64 hours online. And he said the remaining 8 hours there, he was usually collapsed in front of on the keyboard. So his main reasons for so much time online kind of match up. You'll notice in the research study, there really wasn't much input from the subject other than, it was better than sort of real life, and it was an intergenerational thing his parents didn't understand. What McDonald says is that it provides relief from the material. I'm going to say, he says real, but I'm going to say material world, because if you're in my cyber politics, the online world is now probably, for many people, more real than the material world. And what Andrew McDonald says, who's being interviewed, he said, I hadn't gone to college, I didn't have too many friends, and I didn't find myself all that encouraging of a person. I didn't feel like I had anything in material life that made me want to spend time in it. So I decided that my digital life was more important and better. It's a place where I was recognized for skills and talents that I taught myself. And then he realizes he really doesn't, he's now teaching swimming, because he's a swimming instructor, and also studying nursing and working in a senior's place. So he went offline. How do you know? How does one know if one's addicted to being online? Because that's kind of what the article's addressing. Well, there's some suggestions, but there's a fine line between being addicted and to just doing these activities. So I wouldn't worry about it if you're doing all the activities. Yeah. So one is constant phone checking. If you're constantly checking your phone, if you're constantly checking your social media, if you're constantly checking your email, that could be a sign. Or you could be doing it because it's related to work. Or you could be doing it because you're waiting for an email. So it's hard to tell just by watching two people that are constantly checking their phone whether it's an addiction or there's a reason for doing that. If you take a look at an addiction clinic, and this one is the Richmond Addiction Clinic, the clinic says when people come in, there's 3 things to look at: control, compulsion, and consequences. So they package them as that. They package them as the 3 C's: control, compulsion, consequences. And this is in terms of internet addiction. So the first one in control is, does the user have control over the device? That is, can the user put the device down? Can the user put the device down and go to bed and not wake up and check it all the time? Compulsion, and it's a question whether it's compulsion or now just socially acceptable, but checking, for example, a social media site like Facebook while in the middle of a live conversation. So if you're talking to somebody and they're constantly checking social media, probably the 3 C's of this assessment would say they are addicted. So you see people out on dates doing this all the time, right? So I don't know if they're addicted or just trying to avoid each other. And the third one, consequences. Is digital media negatively impacting work? Like, are people losing jobs or not getting jobs because they're online? Because remember, digital media is used a lot for work. Is it negatively impacting school? Is it affecting one's performance, sleep patterns, health, embodied life relationships, hygiene? So that's what they look at. And then the researchers on the article that you read, if you go to, here it is. If you go to page 6 of the article, sorry, page 3 of the article, they list 7 diagnostic criteria. Oh, I thought that was article 6, I see why. It's on page 3. So they list 7 internet addiction diagnostic criteria, which are included when the video was running. I'll try one tomorrow. I think I need compressed. Not only that, it's about 3 years old, so I've always found with maps, something tends to, I'm sure, I have Apple Care, but something tends to go around about we're only about the 3-year mark. So these 7, the ones they list are really contained in the broader 4 ones that are on the video, and the video's online. So the symptoms then, 1, that they list on page 3 under the table there, internet addiction diagnostic criteria, withdrawal. Like if you're not online, do you suffer dysphoric mood, anxiety, irritability, boredom after several days without internet activity? Second, are you preoccupied with the internet? That is, thinking about previous online or anticipate next online session. And then, so those are the 2, and then you have to have 1 of the 3. So you have to have 3 to qualify for an internet addiction, and the other, so you have to have those 2 and 1 of the following 5. That is, developing a tolerance or a marked increase in internet use in order to be satisfied. Persistent desire and combined, it's like quitting smoking, right? So persistent desire combined with unsuccessful attempts to control, cut back, or discontinue internet. Continued excessive use of internet despite knowing that you have a physical or psychological problem that's going to be increased by internet usage. 6, loss of interest, previous hobbies, entertainment as a direct result of internet usage. And 7, used as an escape, okay? Used as an escape to escape dysphoric moods. I'm just going to turn this here so I can see what time it is. So used as an escape to get away from dysphoric moods of helplessness, guilt, anxiety. That is to fill the lack that Lacan talks about. Now, internet addiction, according to their criteria in the research article, it must have lasted for at least 3 months. And you must be online at least 6 hours a day. And that's for reasons that are non-business and non-academic. Well, internet addiction is not included in the DSM. What is included is gaming. And gaming disorder shares 6 of the 7 criteria on page 3, and it adds 4. That's continued use despite the patient knowing it's a problem, lying to the family, using it to escape negative moods, and social, interpersonal, vocational problems arising from the disorder. For gaming, it's 12 months. And to be diagnosed as having a gaming addiction, you have to have had it for 12 months. That would be like playing slot machines or playing poker online for long periods of time. You have to have it for 12 months rather than 3, and you have to meet 5 of the criteria. Now, if you're playing poker online to support yourself through school, I get it, okay? And people do that, of course. So again, take it with a grain of salt, because there's a fine line between being in control. That's why the Internet Addiction Center, the Richmond one, talks about control, talks about compulsion, and talks about consequences. Becomes really important. Now, the article, which is written in 2016, questions whether internet addiction has become more pronounced with social media. That is, once you have access not just to gaming sites, not just to pornography, not just to chat rooms, but also to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, has it increased? Has social media made it increased? And the answer is probably yes. So when the researchers compared internet addiction to Hikikomori, when they compared internet addiction and Hikikomori, what they found was that the withdrawal of Hikikomori affects about 1% to 2% of the population, whereas in Hong Kong, the stats for Hong Kong, it was 17 to 26% of adolescents. Also, Hikikomori tends to occur later in life, around 22, whereas internet addiction starts much younger. They have an overlap, which is why the research article was going to Hikikomori to understand research addiction and to determine whether their case study, which it was, and I would say it's a combination of both. I would disagree with their findings in a sense. Hikikomori and internet addiction have an overlap in the loss of interest in school, work, difficulties with interpersonal relationships. When you disconnect, if the person doesn't suffer withdrawal from disconnecting, they're probably suffering Hikikomori rather than internet addiction. So the authors conclude that in their study of one, that the symptoms fit the description of Hikikomori more than it did in any other psychiatric diagnosis, such as major depression, anxiety disorder, personality disorder. They noted because that he was disconnected and he didn't suffer withdrawal. So then they noted that the intense and prolonged internet use arose as a secondary outcome of his social withdrawal, and that the removal of his computer and internet access did not cause a change in his behavior or social withdrawal, but he was still withdrawn. What I want to go to now is a discussion on the impact of thinking. Because one of the things is that internet usage, and I'll talk about this for about 8 minutes, allows us to think differently. We can take in, it also, in terms of thinking differently and using our brains different, it also changes us in a way neurologically. So we have this really large spectrum of information available to us. We can look up anything at any time and we have answers and solutions. Sometimes they're legit, sometimes they aren't. When this piece was written, which was 2016, I think, at the end of 2015 actually, what the article says is that there's 1.8 billion internet users worldwide. I would say 2 billion at this point, if it's 2 years old. So there's 2 billion users, so we are thinking differently. What it suggests, and I don't know, we can talk about it, following along with Heidegger, it suggests that we've lost an ability to critical think, that we can amass way more amounts of material. We can do way more research, and partly because, but we can't think as critically. We can't have that sort of stillness required in thinking. When we engage in shorter attention spans and more scattered thinking. So for example, the person who wrote this, whose name is Brent Weyers, W-E-Y-E-R-S, what he finds is that when we work online, I should write it up here, when we work online, our brains think differently. We still have this desire that Lacan talks about in terms of fulfilling a lack. But when we work online, our brains are constantly pressured to take in vast amounts of information. That we can amass information that our parents, our grandparents, people before that could not take in. So, you've got many links on one page, you've got sidebar advertisements, your attention is there's always a flash, your attention gets diverted, distraction is part of it, and then you come back. So we have shorter retention, able to take in way more material, more subject to distraction. We're used to be, in a way, we've gotten used to being constantly distracted and interrupted. And what this does in terms of our brain is our brains are unable to get these strong and expansive, which is one of the reasons there was a picture of the brain on there, is unable to forge the strong and expansive neural connections that give depth and distinctiveness to our thinking. So we're becoming, in a way, more single processing units. One of the things we can do very well is shepherd disjointed bits of information into and then out of short memory. So we can hold, it's like we're constantly preparing for an exam. We can hold this in short memory for a period of time. Now, of course, partly what the article's about, and this is the Ware's piece that I'm supplementing with, the human brain is quite malleable. It's subject to change, and it's subject to form new synaptic and neural connections in order to restructure itself in a way to effectively incorporate information. And what the studies he's looking at show is that daily internet users have brains that are gradually being restructured with distinctive neural connections due to this frequent exposure. Now, he's not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, we can think quicker, we can amass more information, we can have attention and be distracted and go back to attention. Our brains are faster. So if you think, I don't know if you go to, one of the things I've always noticed, when I used to go visit my mom, the first day I'd be like, oh my God, everybody was really slow, right? Because it was like, it's brand in Manitoba. Okay, so things were slowly going on. Like you'd be standing in line, you'd be like, oh my God. And then, because it was slow, like people were just like taking their time because it wasn't as fast paced. Toronto's quite fast paced, as is New York, as is, other fabulous cities. So we actually move, think, process much faster. After a couple of days, I didn't notice it was slow, right? Because we kind of adapt. And one of the great things that happens is we can think really fast. We can amass enormous amounts of information. We can be distracted and come back to attention. We can think critically, but it's a different type of critical thinking. Perhaps it's not what they used to call sort of deep thinking, but rather it's more surface that can go through all the connections and derive critical thinking from that. So I'm not with those who argue that we can't think as critically. I think we just, we think differently. And as a collective, internet usage has really increased our own intelligence. So what he ends with, and I think it's an important point, and you know this from writing papers, right? So he ends with saying that the internet can help us substantiate our ideas. Okay, and then it can definitely help us support them with data and statistics. However, it's important not really to use the internet prior to creating your own ideas. Because if you've got an idea and then you back it up by going and doing research, that's one thing. And sometimes, sometimes you have to write something and you don't have an idea. Okay, and so you do go searching for an idea. But the use, what he's suggesting, what Wires is suggesting, is that the utilization of the internet prior to creating your own ideas, he thinks, is ruining originality and critical thinking. So what he's trying to say there, and I think it's useful for people that are in university, is that once, and I tried to make your essay topics sort of that way, so you have to critically think about them, then go to the material in the course, then go to the internet certainly for additional information, rather than starting there. Because the real fear of just starting there when you're thinking of, say you want to do say you have to write a paper on housing crisis. Okay, well certainly you're going to have to do quite a bit of internet research on where the housing crisis is, what's caused it, all that kind of stuff. But before doing that, what he's suggesting is that you, unless you have an idea of how you're going to approach that, from having sort of read something or thought about it, then you're just going to be flooded with information. And that's kind of the problem that he's seeing. Okay, are we good on this? Do you need a recap on the research article? So the research article is really sort of going through criteria that can be considered internet addiction. What I've done is I've supplemented that with 3 other sources because I wanted to make it a bit more interesting for you because it's a fairly short article. The key, I guess, in terms of if you want to boil down all the criteria into the 4 criteria, and I want to point at the video that's not showing, but if you want to condense that down into the 4 criteria that I sort of put out there at the beginning, that will tell you whether someone is addicted. I think a key is withdrawal and increased tolerance, and the idea of social isolation. And then what you need to supplement it with is this idea of what does critical thinking mean in internet use, which is what I kind of ended with there. So are there any comments or questions at all? Or observations? Anybody? We good? Okay, can people tell me, I think there's 4 people presenting. Can I see your hands? Owen, yeah, definitely 4 people presenting. So why don't we do, and I'm not sure what time it is, I want to try and get this hookup working, otherwise you'll just have to read it off the computer, which is fine. What time is it? It is 10:02?
Yeah.
So why don't you come back at 5 after, we'll do the 4 presentations, and then if anybody wants to talk to me afterwards about their paper or anything, we'll have a bit of time for that.